He took 8 blades for an alien child, then woke to find elite fighters at his bed. The station smelled like something was always burning. That was the first thing Corporal Day noticed when he stepped off the transit pod and into the open floor of Veyron Station's lower market. It was not a dangerous smell. It was just the smell of too many species packed into one place. Alien food cooking on hot plates, engine grease from the repair bays 2 levels up, and the sharp chemical bite of the air recyclers working overtime. It was the smell of a place that never slept, never stopped, and never really cared who walked through it. Day had been on Veyron Station for 11 days. He was stationed here as part of a small human diplomatic support unit, 4 soldiers, 1 officer, and a translator named Bomb, who complained about everything but was secretly very good at her job. Their job was simple. Stand near the human ambassador, look professional, and do not cause any incidents. That was the official order. Do not cause any incidents. Day was off duty today. He had changed out of his uniform and was wearing plain gray clothes, a jacket, and boots that had seen better days. He had no weapon on him. Regulations off a military base required a permit for carry, and Day had not bothered to get one for a simple walk through a market. He just wanted to find something to eat that was not a military ration pack, maybe look at the stalls, and spend 2 hours being a person instead of a soldier. He walked slowly. There was no reason to rush. The lower market of Veyron Station was wide and loud. Stalls were packed close together on both sides of the main walkway, selling things Day could not always identify. Some stalls had cloth and clothing in colors that human eyes found a little painful to look at directly. Some had food, real food, cooked food, things on sticks, and things in bowls. And Day stopped at one run by a 4-armed Greenwich vendor who handed him something wrapped in a flatbread that turned out to be surprisingly good. He stood there, eating it, and watching the crowd move around him. The crowd on Veyron was always mixed. Humans were not rare here, but they were not common either. Most of the faces Day saw were not human. Lyurians with their pale silver skin and large dark eyes, Scavari with their wide flat heads and the slow way they moved their necks, Drenosi merchants in long coats carrying data tablets, and dozens of species Day had never learned the names of. It was the kind of place where nobody looked at you twice, which Day liked. He was not interesting here. He was just another body in the crowd. He finished his food and kept walking. He had been walking for about 20 minutes when he heard it. High and thin, like something trying very hard to make itself heard without making too much noise. It came from the left, from the space between 2 stalls where the walkway narrowed and the lighting was weaker. Day turned his head. At first, he only saw the back of the crowd, people walking, people talking, nobody stopping. Then he saw the child. It was Lyurian, small, very small, maybe 3 years old by the way it moved, though Day knew Lyurian age was hard to judge by human standards. It was standing alone between the stalls, pressed against the wall, its large dark eyes moving quickly across the crowd, with the specific kind of fear that small things have when they realize they are lost. It was not crying loudly. It was making that small, tight sound, the sound of a child trying not to panic. Day had a younger sister. He recognized the sound. He took a step toward the child, and that was when he saw the others. Scavari, adult males, moving through the crowd from the far side with a kind of slow, deliberate patience that Day recognized immediately as the movement of people who had done something like this before. They were not running. They were not loud. They were just walking toward the child in a way that closed off every exit, and the crowd around them was already beginning to peel away without quite knowing why. 2 more came from the right, then 1 more from behind the far stall. 8 total. Day counted them the way soldiers count, automatically, without deciding to. He could see the blades. Not all of them, not clearly, but the way their hands were positioned, the way their coats hung, he could see enough. Scavari traffickers were not rare in the outer stations. They moved children the way other criminals moved cargo. And they were good at it because they were fast, and they worked in groups, and they picked their moments carefully. This was one of those moments. The crowd had opened a wide, quiet circle around the space. People had stopped walking. They were watching from a distance, which was what most people did in situations like this, on a station like this. Not because they were cruel, because they were not stupid, and because nobody wanted to be the one who stepped into the middle of 8 armed Scavari for a child they did not know. Day stood at the edge of that circle. He looked at the child. He looked at the 8 traffickers moving in. He looked around at the crowd that had gone still and quiet and was not going to move. He did not think about it very long. He walked forward. One of the Scavari saw him coming and moved to cut him off, raising a hand. He walked directly at the man. And something about the way he walked, steady, no hesitation, no fear, made the Scavari pause for just 1 second. That 1 second was enough. Day stepped past the raised hand, put himself between the child and the group, and turned to face all 8 of them. The child made a small sound behind him. Day did not look back. He kept his eyes forward. The Scavari looked at him. He looked at them. For about 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then the first blade came out. Day set his feet wide and breathed once, slow and full, the way he had been trained to breathe before something hard. His hands were empty. His heart was going fast, but his head was clear. 8 of them, no weapon. A child at his back that could not run. The first Scavari moved, and Day moved with it, and the market on Veyron Station learned something it had not known before, about what a human being looks like when it has decided not to move. The circle held. The crowd watched. And Corporal Day, alone, off-duty, unarmed, and completely unreasonable, stood his ground. He took 8 blades for an alien child, then woke to find elite fighters at his bed. The first Scavari was fast. Day had sparred with Scavari fighters twice during joint training exercises 18 months ago, and he remembered the speed. Their upper body was deceptive, wide and slow-looking, like something built for patience rather than movement. But their strike was quick. The first one came in low and diagonal, blade angled at his midsection, and Day turned into it rather than away, catching the arm at the wrist and pulling it past him. The blade caught his jacket. He felt the sting of it across his forearm, but did not look down. No time to look down. The second came in from the left while he was still holding the first. Day let go, stepped back 1 step, and felt the second blade go across the outside of his shoulder. Not deep. He registered the pain the way the body registers pain during a fight. As information, not as an emergency. His shoulder worked. His arm worked. He was still standing. That was enough information. He drove his elbow into the second attacker's face and heard a sound that meant the nose was broken. The man stumbled back. Day turned. 3 and 4 came together, which was smart. They had spread slightly apart, so that dealing with one put the other at a better angle. Day took a blade across the ribs on the left side, a fast, short cut, not deep, but bad enough, and used the momentum of the turn to bring his knee up hard into the third attacker's midsection. The man folded. Day grabbed the back of his head on the way down, and introduced it to the floor with a sound that echoed off the market walls. 4 got him across the back. He felt it like a hot line being drawn between his shoulder blades. He straightened and turned anyway. Behind him, the child had not moved. It was pressed against the wall, silent now, both hands flat against the surface, watching. Its dark eyes were fixed on Day, with an expression he could not read and did not have time to think about. 5 and 6 tried to circle. Day did not let them complete it. He moved forward instead of backward, which broke the geometry of what they were trying to do and forced them to adjust. 6 made the mistake of grabbing for his arm. Day let him grab it, used the grip as an anchor, and hit him 3 times fast. 6 went down. 5 was more careful after that. He moved wide. Day watched him and watched 7 at the same time, splitting his attention the way training teaches you to, and felt something warm running down his side. The rib cut was worse than he had thought. He took a breath, and his left side answered with a sharp complaint that told him at least one rib was cracked. He breathed through it. 7 came in, and Day took the cut on his left forearm deliberately, blocking the blade with his arm so his right hand was free to hit, which it did, hard, twice, until 7 was no longer a problem. His forearm hurt in a way that was more than a cut. He did not think about that. 5 was still moving wide, cautious. The man had seen 7 of his group go down in under 30 seconds, and he was doing the math on what he was looking at. Day stood between the man and the child. He was breathing hard. His left side was bleeding. His back was bleeding. His shoulder was bleeding. He was standing in the middle of a market on an alien space station, in plain gray clothes, with empty hands, and he was still standing, and the child behind him was still unharmed. He looked at number 5 and said nothing. 5 looked back. Then 8 came from the right, the last one, the one who had hung back, the one Day had been tracking at the edge of his awareness the whole time. He was bigger than the others, and faster, and he got Day across the left arm again in the same place. And this time, Day felt something give that should not have given. He did not fall. He turned into the attack, got inside the reach, and headbutted the man directly in the face. Scavari skulls were hard. Human skulls were also hard. The difference was that Day had decided to do it, which meant he hit without flinching, and the other one had not expected it. 8 went down. At some point during the last exchange, 5 had decided the math was not in his favor, and had disappeared into the crowd. Day did not chase him. He had no interest in chasing anyone. He turned back to the child. The Lurian child was still pressed against the wall, still watching him. One of its small hands had come up to its face. Its eyes were enormous and dark and very still. It was not crying. It was just looking at him the way a small creature looks at something it cannot explain. Day took one step toward it, and then his legs decided they were done. He did not fall forward. He slid down slowly, his back against the wall, until he was sitting on the floor of the market. He looked down at his left arm, and saw that the second cut there had gone deeper than he had thought. His side was still bleeding. He was going to need a medical bay, and probably several conversations he did not want to have. He looked at the child. The child looked at him. Day opened his right arm slowly, the one that still worked properly, and held it out. The Lyurian child looked at it for a moment. Then it crossed the short distance between them, and pressed itself against his side, tucking its head under his chin, and Day closed his arm around it. He leaned his head back against the wall, and breathed, in and out, slow. The pain was getting louder now that the fight was over. His body was presenting its full report, and the report was not good. But the child was warm against his side, and the child was still breathing, and that, Day decided, was the only part that actually mattered. The crowd, which had been completely silent, made no sound. Someone ran for medical, someone else called security. But for a long moment, in the middle of the market on Veyron Station, there was just a bleeding human soldier, sitting on the floor, with an alien child asleep against his chest, and nobody around him said a single word. They just watched. And several of them, later, when asked what they had seen, would say the same thing in different languages. They would say they had seen a human being do something they had no word for. Not bravery exactly, not strategy, something simpler and stranger than both. Something that looked, in every language, a lot like it had simply never occurred to him not to. He took 8 blades for an alien child, then woke to find elite fighters at his bed. Ara had been working the lower market medical post for 2 years, and she thought she had seen everything. She was wrong. She came running when the call came through on her station communicator. Fight in the lower market, multiple injuries, requesting medical. And she had her kit on her back and her sleeves already rolled up before she cleared the corridor. She was Lyurian, trained in field medicine at the Outer Station Medical Institute, and she was very good at her job. She had treated stab wounds before. She had treated Scavari, Drenosi, Greenwich, and yes, once, a human. Though that had been a minor burn, and she had mostly just applied a patch and sent him on his way. This was not a minor burn. She pushed through the edge of the crowd, which parted for her medical vest without argument, and stopped. The human was sitting on the floor, against the wall. He was bleeding from at least 4 visible wounds: shoulder, side, back that she could see from the front, and something bad on his left forearm. His gray jacket was dark with blood on the left side. His face was calm. That was the thing that stopped her for just 1 second longer than she expected. The complete calm on his face, like a man waiting for a transit pod, not like a man who had just been cut open 8 times. The Lyurian child was asleep against his chest. Ara moved. She crossed to him and knelt down, and the human looked at her and said something in his language that her translator worked on for a moment before giving her. "I think my arm might be broken." "More than one thing might be broken," she said back through her translator. "Don't move." "I wasn't planning to," he said. She got a pressure sleeve on the forearm first. The cut there had gone deep, and the bone underneath was fractured. Not fully broken, but close. And then addressed the side wound, which was the one that worried her most. He had cracked ribs, and the cut had opened the skin, but not gone far enough to reach anything critical. Lucky, stupid lucky, she thought, and pressed the sealing foam in and heard him exhale once through his teeth, controlled. "You are in pain," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," he said. Also not a complicated answer. She looked at him. He was looking at the child. The child was still sleeping, still pressed against his right side, and the human's right arm was still around it, steady, not moving, as if he had decided that arm had one job right now, and that job was not going to stop, until someone told him the child was safe. "The child is unharmed," Ara said. The human's face changed, just slightly. Something in his jaw relaxed. "Good," he said. That was all. Ara finished her work and called for a stretcher. And while she waited, she sat back on her heels and looked at the man. She had heard things about humans. Everyone in the outer stations had heard things. They were aggressive, unpredictable, emotionally volatile. They were loud, and they took up too much space, and they had a disturbing tendency to smile at inappropriate times. The Lyurian diplomatic files described them as a young species with significant impulse regulation difficulties. She looked at this human, sitting in a pool of his own blood, calm as still water, holding a child he did not know. She decided the diplomatic files needed to be updated. The word spread the way word always spreads on a station. Fast, fragmented, getting bigger with each telling. By the time the stretcher arrived, the immediate crowd had grown to fill the whole corridor. By the time Day was being carried toward the medical bay, people on the upper levels had heard about it. Lyurian station workers were sending messages to family. A Drenosi merchant who had watched the whole thing from his stall had already uploaded footage to the station's public information network. Not a professional recording, just a personal device, shaky and poorly lit, but clear enough. Clear enough to see one human stand in front of 8 armed Scavari. Clear enough to see him take every blade without running. Clear enough to see him still standing at the end of it, with the child behind him. The video ran for 42 seconds. It had been viewed 11,000 times before Day reached the medical bay. Ryo heard about it from his daughter, who heard about it from a neighbor who had been in the market when it happened. Ryo was old, very old by Lyurian standards, and he had lived on Veyron Station for 30 years and had seen many things. He had sent his grandchild to the market with a keeper that morning, and the keeper had lost the child in the crowd, and Ryo had spent 20 minutes of the worst fear he had known in decades before his communicator told him his grandchild had been found, safe, unharmed, because of a human. He went to the market corridor before security had finished clearing it. He stood at the spot where the wall was marked with blood, and he looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at the floor where the human had sat. Then he closed his eyes. In Lyurian culture, there was a concept called Vethara. It did not translate cleanly. The closest human equivalent was something between a life debt and a spiritual recognition, the understanding that someone had reached into the current of events and changed what would have happened, permanently, at cost to themselves, for someone they had no reason to help. It was not given often. Ryo stood in the empty corridor and felt it settle into his chest like something permanent. He did not know the human's name yet. He asked a security officer. The officer checked a record and told him. Ryo said the name quietly, once, to himself. Day. A short name. Simple. Easy to say. He said it again, the way you say something you intend to keep. Then he turned and walked to the medical bay, because there was something he needed to do, and he was not a man who waited when something needed to be done. By the time he arrived, he was not alone. The corridor outside the medical bay had people in it already. Lyrians mostly, some other species, people who had seen the video, and people who had been in the market, and people who had just heard and come. They were quiet. They were not doing anything in particular. They were just there, in the way that people are sometimes there when something has happened that they cannot look away from. Era pushed past them to get back inside. She stopped at the door and looked back at the crowd. She thought about the human's face, that calm, steady, unremarkable face. She thought about the diplomatic files and their careful language about impulse regulation. She went inside and shook her head and got back to work. Outside, the crowd stayed, and the name moved through it, quiet and steady, passed from one mouth to the next. Day, the human. He took 8 blades for an alien child, then woke to find elite fighters at his bed. Day woke up and thought something was wrong with the room. It took him a few seconds to understand why. He was in a medical bay, white ceiling, low hum of recycled air, the faint antiseptic smell that all station medical bays had, no matter what species ran them. That was normal. The bed he was on was slightly too short for him, which was also normal, because most furniture on Veyron Station was built for species that were smaller than the average human. His left arm was in a support brace. His side was bandaged tight. His back pulled when he tried to shift his weight. All of that made sense. What did not make sense was the silence. It was the wrong kind of silence, not the silence of an empty room. The silence of a room where multiple people were being very deliberately quiet. He turned his head. There were soldiers along the walls. Not human soldiers. Lyrian. 15 of them, standing at even intervals around the perimeter of the medical bay. And they were not relaxed. They were standing the way soldiers stand when they are on formal duty, weight balanced, hands at their sides, eyes forward. They were wearing armor that Day had only seen in briefing files. Dark silver, fitted close, marked with symbols at the shoulder that his military recognition training placed immediately. Blade guard, first circle. Day stared at them for a moment. They stared back, or the ones facing him did. The ones facing other directions did not move. He was very aware, suddenly, of the fact that he was lying in a medical bed, in a paper-thin station gown, with a broken arm and cracked ribs, and he had not been briefed on any of this. He looked at the ceiling for a second, then back at the soldiers. "Hello," he said. None of them responded. They were not being rude. He had the distinct impression they were waiting for something specific. He found out what, when the door opened. She was taller than the other Lyurian soldiers, which was notable because they were not short. She moved differently too. Not the deliberate stillness of the guards, but something more natural. The ease of someone who had been the most dangerous person in most rooms for so long that they no longer thought about it. Her armor was the same dark silver, but her shoulder markings were heavier, layered, the kind that accumulated over a very long career. She had a blade at her side, that Day's trained eye identified as ceremonial rather than combat, except that the edge on it was real and recent. She walked to the foot of his bed and stopped. Her dark eyes were very steady. "Corporal Day," she said. Her translator rendered it cleanly, which meant she was using formal address protocol. "I am Sora, commander of the First Circle, Lyurian Blade Guard, Outer Station Division." She paused. "You are awake." "I am," Day said. He was doing his best to sound like a person who had expected to wake up surrounded by elite alien special forces. He did not think he was entirely succeeding. "Can I ask what you're doing in my medical bay?" "Watching over you," Sora said. "I see." He did not entirely see. "Is there a specific reason?" Sora was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone thinking about what to say. The quiet of someone deciding how much of the truth was appropriate. "You are owed a debt," she said finally, "by the Lyurian people, by the family of the child, by station law, and by personal honor. The Blade Guard stands watch until the debt is formally addressed." Day processed that. "I didn't do it for a debt," he said. "We know," Sora said. "That is part of why we are here." He looked at the 15 soldiers around the room. He looked at Sora. He was a corporal in a human diplomatic support unit, and he had been on this station for 11 days, and he had gone for a walk to find lunch. He was not sure how he had arrived at this specific moment. "How long have I been out?" he asked. 14 hours, Sora said. "Have the soldiers been here the whole time?" Yes, Day thought about that. 15 of the most elite soldiers in Lyurian military service, standing at attention in a medical bay for 14 hours, watching over an unconscious human corporal. He thought about what Ara would say about that. Ara, the medic who had patched him up in the market, who had come to check on him twice more according to the chart at the end of his bed. He thought about the right words to use. "Thank you," he said. Sora tilted her head slightly, the Larian equivalent of a nod. "The child's name is Liru," she said. "The grandfather's name is Ryo. He has been outside this bay since last night. He would like to speak with you when you are able." "He can come in," Day said immediately. "He is not alone," Sora said. There was something in her tone that might have been a warning, or might have been amusement. Possibly both. "There are several hundred people outside." Day was quiet for a second. "Several hundred," he whispered. "The number has been growing. The footage from the market has been viewed approximately 900,000 times as of an hour ago." He stared at the ceiling. "I just went to get lunch," he said, to nobody in particular. None of the Blade Guard soldiers moved. Sora watched him with that same steady gaze. Somewhere outside the medical bay, through the closed door in the corridor wall, there were hundreds of people waiting. And at the foot of his bed stood one of the most respected military commanders in Lyurian space, who had apparently decided that standing watch over a wounded human corporal was a reasonable use of her time. Day looked at his bandaged arm. He looked at the brace. He took a slow breath that made his ribs complain. "Can I get some water?" he asked. One of the Blade Guard soldiers moved to the supply station, filled a cup, brought it to him, and held it, because Day's good arm was still a little unsteady. The soldier did this without being asked twice, without any sign of discomfort, with the same grave seriousness that the rest of them brought to standing at attention along the walls. Day drank the water. He set the cup down. He looked at Sora. "All right," he said. "Let Rio in." The door opened, and the old Lyurian man who walked through it did not say anything for a long moment. He stood at the side of the bed, and looked at Day, and his dark eyes were wet, and his hands were folded in front of him, in a gesture that Day's translator identified as the highest form of Lyurian respectful greeting, a gesture usually reserved for elders, teachers, and the dead who were being honored. Rio was giving it to a human corporal in a medical gown with a broken arm. Day did not know what to do with that, so he did the only thing that made sense. He sat up straighter, despite the ribs, and he nodded back. Simple, respectful, human. Rio made a sound that the translator took a moment to process. When it did, it gave Day 2 words. Thank you. He took 8 blades for an alien child, then woke to find elite fighters at his bed. Rio sat in the chair beside the bed for a long time. He did not speak much at first. He had brought the child, Liru, with him, and Liru sat in his grandfather's lap and watched Day with the wide, unblinking attention of a very young creature that has decided something is interesting. She had the same large dark eyes all Lyrians had, and she used them the way young children use their eyes, completely and without self-consciousness, staring openly and without apology. Day looked at her. She looked at him. He made a small face, not frightening, just unexpected, and Liru made a sound that the translator rendered as laughter, high and brief, and pressed her face into Ryo's chest. Ryo looked at Day over the child's head. Something in the old man's expression shifted. She does not do that easily. She has been very quiet since yesterday. She was scared, Day said. That makes sense. She was not scared of you, Ryo said, even in the market. I was told she stayed close to you. She did not try to run. Day thought about that. He remembered the child pressed against the wall, watching. He had thought at the time that she was frozen with fear. Maybe she had been, or maybe she had made a small, instinctive decision of her own, the way small creatures sometimes do, deciding without words where the safe place was. I'm glad she's all right, Day said. Because of you, Ryo said. I happened to be there, Day said. Ryo shook his head slowly. Many people happened to be there, he said. You are the only one who moved. Day did not have an answer for that. He looked at his bandaged arm instead. She had not left the room since Ryo came in, and Day had the impression she was not going to leave the room until she was satisfied about something, though he was not yet sure what that something was. She had watched the exchange between him and Ryo with that same steady attention she brought to everything. May I ask you something? She said. Sure, Day said. She was quiet for a moment, the way she was always quiet before she spoke, deliberate, like someone who had learned to mean every word they said. Why did you do it? She asked. You had no weapon. You were not on duty. The child was not human. You had no reason that I can identify. I have read the footage many times. You saw the group close in, and you simply walked forward. She paused. Why? Day looked at her. Then he looked at Liru, who had turned back around, and was watching him again from the safety of her grandfather's arms. There was a kid, he said. She seemed to be waiting for more. There was not more. That is the whole answer? She asked. Yes, Day said. Sora turned to the nearest Blade Guard soldier and said something in Lyurian that the translator caught as, Did you understand that? The soldier said something back. Sora turned to the next one, and the next. She went around the room. Not literally. She did not move from her position, but she made eye contact with each soldier in sequence, asking something quietly, and Day watched each of them respond with small, careful answers. Then Sora turned back to him. I need you to understand something, she said. The Lyurian Blade Guard takes its oath at the age of 16. The process of selection lasts 4 years. The training process lasts 6. The full making of one Blade Guard soldier takes a decade of deliberate, painful, consistent work. We lose soldiers in that process. The ones who remain are the ones who have proven, over 10 years, that they are capable of exactly what you did yesterday, entering a dangerous situation, without hesitation, to protect someone who cannot protect themselves. She looked at him steadily. You did it in under 1 second, with no training for this specific situation, with nothing but your body. And you did it for a child you had never seen before. She reached to her side and unclipped the blade there, the honor blade. She held it in both hands and set it carefully on the foot of his bed. This is not a weapon, she said. It is given only as a declaration. It means the giver considers the receiver to be of equal standing. I have given this blade twice in 23 years of service. She paused. You are the third. Day looked at the blade. It was beautiful. Dark metal with a faint pattern worked into the surface. The grip wrapped in something that was not leather, but looked like it. He looked at Sora. I don't know what to say, he said. You do not need to say anything, Sora said. It is a statement, not a transaction. Ryo made a sound. Day's translator processed it and gave him a word. Yes, but the weight behind it was heavier than one word could carry. Liru reached out from her grandfather's arms, stretching toward Day, both small hands open. Ryo let her lean. She touched Day's bandaged forearm with 2 fingers, very gently, very deliberately, the way children touch things they have decided matter. Then she pulled her hand back and looked at him with those enormous dark eyes. Day looked at her and felt something settle in his chest that he could not name and did not try to. Later, after Ryo and Liru had gone, and the Blade Guard had been dismissed, at Day's somewhat embarrassed request, and Sora had left with one last long look at him that he could not read, Ara came in to check his dressings. She worked in silence for a few minutes, replacing the ceiling foam on his side, checking the brace on his arm. You know, she said, without looking up from her work, there are 940,000 views on that footage now. So I've been told, Day said. My mother sent me a message about it, Ara said. She lives on Lyre Prime. She wanted to know if I had met you. She paused. I told her I had. She was quiet again for a moment. She asked what you were like. What did you say? Ara secured the last seal and sat back. She looked at him with the direct, assessing look she had first given him in the market, the look of someone who makes decisions about things quickly and does not often change them. I said you were calm, she said, and that you were not very good at being careful with yourself. She tilted her head. And that you reminded me of something my instructor told me in my first year of training. She said that the most dangerous quality a person can have is not skill or strength. It is the kind of character that does not stop to ask whether something is worth doing. It simply does the thing. Ara looked at him for one more moment. She was talking about healers, but I think it applies. She packed her kit and left. Day lay back against the pillow and stared at the ceiling. The room was quiet now. The honor blade was still at the foot of his bed, dark and still. His arm ached. His ribs ached. His back ached. He was going to have a very long conversation with his unit officer tomorrow, and probably a longer one with the human ambassador, and there were going to be forms to fill out and reports to write and at least one formal inquiry into the incident. He thought about all of that for a moment. Then he thought about Liru's small hands, pressed against the wall, the sound she made when she had stopped being afraid. He closed his eyes. Outside the medical bay, the corridor was still full of people who had no reason to be there except that something had happened, and they had needed to be close to it, the way people gather near the place where something true has occurred. They did not all share a language. They did not all know each other. They were simply there. And somewhere in that crowd, Rio held his grandchild in his arms and said a name that by the next morning would be known across 4 star systems. Day. Not a title, not a rank, not a legend. Just a name, belonging to a man who had gone for a walk, found a child who needed help, and had not once, not for a single second, thought about whether it was his problem to solve. That was the whole story. That was all it had ever been. They asked what made humans dangerous. The answer was never the weapons. It was the part of them that could not look away.